For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser here with McCahl Murray and LMSW, if I got those letters in order, with some experience working with college athletes as well as with international students and being kind of a support system there in different ways at different points in her career for those different special populations, and with some of the mental health aspects that have come back into the headlines this week with LSU football. I thought, folks that have watched the YouTube channel at all this week, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about some of those mental health components that get overlooked so much. McCahl, what's up? How are things over on your end as you obviously gear up for Christmas?
Yeah, Christmas is in full swing at our household. Finishing out the semester, so it's ending up with finals week. So that is a great relief for me and even more so for students. So just ready for the break that's coming up here for all of us.
What was your reaction, I guess, when you first saw, and we won't get too much into specifics on Eric Gilbert at LSU and try to speculate into his specific situation, but when you hear that a freshman basically is going through some homesickness potentially, and things are kind of tough and weighing on him this year, I think for me, with some experience working on a college campus and working with some of the international students, I immediately thought back to the amount of presentations we looked at of kind of that cycle of that first semester, first year away from home, and the fact that that is something that is super normal for any college student, and certainly college students that are a little bit away from their families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that's something that we experience every fall, every intake, that some of the students are feeling homesick and they're feeling withdrawn from their families. And with international students who we have worked with, they are thousands of miles from home. So that is even putting more pressure on them. They can't just pick up the phone in the middle of the day because it might be the middle of the night for their parents. And the last thing a parent wants is a phone call in the middle of the night. So they would just panic. So it's wondering what those students are thinking at that time. And it really brings a lot of isolation to the students. And I think this year especially, it's been even more. The students can't reach out to a ton of people on campus. They're kind of stuck in their little bubbles if they are meeting those requirements of COVID. They're not getting out and about as much. Even their classes are more like this space. And it's really unfortunate that they don't get to experience the LSU that you and I experienced, because, you know, when I'm feeling down, I know that I want to get out and I want to do something. I want to distract myself. But when there's not a lot of opportunities for students to do that, they just feel isolated and lonely. And those feelings of missing home just get bigger and bigger.
It probably doesn't really get quite the same spotlight as when you start talking about LSU football players fresh off of a national championship talking about it. But what was that like to see? I mean, whether the specificness of homesickness or just in general, some of those mental health components as they relate to student athletes kind of come into the forefront this week, because as I mentioned kind of in the intro, I think it's something that is always there more than people necessarily realize. And it's something that people struggle with, whether they're athletes or international students or just any other freshman on campus. But again, it doesn't come to the look at the national champions going through this sort of a spotlight.
You know, I think a lot of times we have to remember that freshmen are still freshmen. Like, they are still 18-year-olds and 18, 19, sometimes 17-year-olds who experience the same thing that every other student experiences. When you add that they're in a special population, whether being an athlete, whether being an international student, kind of not fitting that norm, then that adds even more pressure on them. And being under the spotlight from their families, like, this might be the only hope for their family back in their home country, or this might have been their opportunity to get an excellent education. And all of that pressure can build up, and they're not immune to all of the mental health issues that everybody in the population experiences. And it's unfair to think that of them. Just because they play in front of millions of people every weekend, that doesn't mean that they don't experience things on a real basis.
And we've seen, I guess, some older, whether it be older players or former players or older fans, be kind of critical. But in terms of the ability to handle some of these things, how much do you see that, whether grow and individuals kind of grow those tools to better handle a situation like this over time, or different ebbs and flows, or just different ways that it can affect someone who is 17 or 18 and doing this for the first time versus some of those other portions that we've talked about?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when we're talking about somebody who's a freshman, they might have these experiences, these mental health problems before they arrive to campus and may not be discussing them. But then when you drop somebody in a new environment, it could make these problems go bigger, or it could just make new problems arise altogether. And I think that's one of the problems that we are seeing across the board at every university for every freshman, that they are experiencing new things and they don't really know how to react. Developmentally, they're not totally there yet. When I think 10 years ago, what I was thinking, I wasn't all there yet either. My maturity level hadn't even really fully gone into effect. So that's, being empathetic and thinking about, these are teenagers. A lot of these students are low 20s. They don't really know what they want in the world. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to ask for help, and they don't want to be coded as weird or having problems or not fitting into the perfect profile. And normalizing all of these things that so many people experience, every single person experiences some amount of this, and normalizing this to the point where people feel comfortable talking about it more is something that I think is really important.
And yeah, I was going to ask you basically what were some sort of tips or advice or ideas for, whether it be people that are dealing with some of these things or people around them, that just kind of ways to maybe engage that conversation. Sounds like it could be one of the first keys, is just kind of acknowledging aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, be ready to be uncomfortable, because these are uncomfortable conversations. They are not ones that our society have really backed a lot, and asking a friend if they're truly okay is something that's uncomfortable, and people are scared to hear what that answer is. But those questions can save lives. But when you ask the question, you also have to be prepared for what responses you can get. And I think that is something that we shy away from. It's not something that people want to hear, especially about people they care about. So publicizing those resources that we do have on campus, and I know other campuses have, so that if you hear those responses, you know what you can tell your friend or where you can report those things to, because LSU has a ton, the US has a ton. They are in a variety of different methods, and I think reaching out and asking friends what's going on is something that's important, but also being prepared for what you're about to hear.
And obviously each situation is very individual and singular, and has to be approached its own way. And you don't want to overgeneralize too much in terms of an athlete population or anything, but some of the things you're talking about of just kind of an aversion to having the conversations. I think probably athletics is a place where that, when everyone is so used to being prided on like a certain level of physical strength and to a degree mental strength, that it's probably not the easiest conversation to broach.
Right. I mean, when you're talking to somebody who has a national championship under their belt and they have worked extremely hard physically and mentally, that's not something that people think, oh, this person could be suffering from a number of mental illnesses. And that is the reality. And it could be any kind of sport, it could be any population on campus, but nobody is immune to this. It doesn't matter what experiences you've had. Every single person could develop something. And I think that within COVID, we are even more isolated. And this is a time that a lot of the mental illnesses are showing more, and people are finding out what they are struggling with.
And yeah, we've alluded to it a couple of times now, just the strange year circumstances and additional isolation has really, I think, amplified some of those situations because people have not necessarily been able to reach out and find those new support systems when, particularly for a college freshman, they're farther away from home in some cases than they ever have been before. And I guess we talk in a normal year about how critical it is to get involved, and so much of that is about making those connections. So yeah, how much have you seen that play a role now to everything that you normally preach to an incoming college freshman is kind of taken away in terms of coping mechanisms?
Yeah, definitely. I had a student in his second week that was like, well, how can I join clubs and how can I meet friends? And he was living off campus. And I didn't know what to tell him. And it's hard because what does he want to sit in a platform like this with people he doesn't know and start talking to them like that? I mean, I know that's not a situation that I envision for myself, meeting new people. So it's definitely something that we had to look in more and figure out some more and safe options for students, because, I don't want to say like, I don't know, but it was a pause. It wasn't like, oh, I can pull up TigerLink and find whatever you're interested, from ping pong to fashion to video games, and then find something for you to go to. That's not the case. And it's hard. And because of that, students are withdrawing and they're feeling lonely. And when you feel those things, sometimes you don't want to do academics and you don't want to do anything. And it's just trickles down.
Any other thoughts, I guess, kind of as we wind down on just things that people should look out for, whether opportunities or whatever, and we can certainly include any websites or links or anything like that in the kind of the info below, but it's obviously a very serious topic, and it's unfortunate to see it be something that has to be discussed, because you obviously wish everyone was doing great, but I think in a lot of ways, knowing that it is happening, it is good to see it become something that people are becoming more aware of.
Yeah, I think, if you notice something different about people you are close with, the first step is talking to them, and the second step is getting somebody else involved. And we will put links in there for LSU people, for people in the US, because all of the mental health concerns about people who are all reportable, and to have somebody else check in.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. It's always lovely talking to you, Jarrett.
Likewise. She's McCahl Murray, as I mentioned, has some experience working with athletes as well as experience working with international students, particularly freshmen transitioning into university life for the first time for Louisiana versus all y'all. Jarrett Roser.